I was in Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida, for the first time with my family. My daughter, who is 7 years old, and I had never visited that location before. My kid was not to find out until the day we were actually going to leave, as my husband had planned. My anxiety levels increased as a result of this since it is difficult to keep a surprise, especially one that is so significant. In addition to that, I had to pack without my kids seeing what I was doing. In addition, traveling makes me quite anxious, and we were heading to Walt Disney World, which had been a lifelong goal of mine ever since I was a small girl. I had been looking forward to this trip for a very long time. Another issue that I was concerned about was having persistent back discomfort. As a result of the persistent pain in my lumbar spine, I underwent spinal fusion surgery in 2014 on my S1, L4, and L5 vertebrae. After exhausting practically all other treatment options, I turned to this solution since my insurance provider insisted that I required surgery. After that, the procedure caused pressure to build up in my C-joints, which led the doctor to recommend that I have another surgery to correct the issue. I made the decision not to have the surgery since the recovery time was going to be 6 weeks after each side was completed. That was too much time away from work, and I feared that it would only make my discomfort worse and create greater harm. I was right about both of those things. My hands and feet, as well as the rest of my body, were in constant discomfort due to the chronic condition I was suffering from. Because of the severe agony, I took strong pain medicine. On top of that, I suffer from asthma and allergies, and I've had endometriosis since I was in my early 30s and ulcers ever since I was 16 years old. I didn't want any of my previous health problems to prevent me from having a good time at Disney World, so I took precautions. My daughter's first experience was something we wanted his parents to be a part of, so my husband, daughter, and I went with his parents. My allergies flared up while we were in Jamaica on our honeymoon, and I expected they would do the same thing while we were in Central Florida. Except for the guest rooms, the majority of the Jamaican resort we stayed at was outside and exposed to the fresh air. After only a few days there, I started having difficulties breathing normally again. The majority of my time was spent inside the room. Therefore, before coming to Disney World, I went to the doctor and requested a prescription for steroids just in case I ended up needing them while I was in Florida. I had never been to the middle part of Florida before, but I imagined it to be similar to Jamaica in that it was thick with vegetation and resembled the jungle. The majority of our time on our first full day at that location was spent getting to and checking into the hotel. We swam in the pool till late in the evening. I wasn't experiencing any symptoms, but my asthma and allergies began to flare up. After that, I began taking the steroids the following morning. I didn't want the sneezing, headaches, and chest tightness that I've been having to slow us down too much on our vacation. My daughter and I, who are both avid lovers of Disney, were awestruck by how amazing everything was. Due to the fact that I was so enthusiastic, it was a bit difficult for me to take everything in. Although I did experience some morning sickness and my allergies were acting up, it looked as though everything was going well for me overall. Even though it was a very busy day, my back didn't bother nearly as much as it would on a typical day. That made me really delighted. On the third day of our trip, which was also Mother's Day, we spent another full day at Disney World. Because of the steroids, my allergies appeared to be under control, but I had nausea once again, and I ended up vomiting up. I did not tell anyone about the nausea and vomiting that I was experiencing since I believed that it was due to the fact that my ulcers had just returned. Because I didn't want to bring anyone's spirits down, I just avoided having any kind of conversation with my spouse about the matter. In spite of the fact that I was on the go for the majority of the day, I only experienced mild allergy symptoms, and my back and chronic pain were in acceptable levels. In the end, we went to bed at 10 or 11 o'clock, and we were looking forward to our fourth day of seeing the theme parks. We intended to spend another 2 full days at the parks, and we had fast passes for each of those days. I woke up feeling quite queasy about 1 or 2 in the morning, and I began violently puking in the restroom. After around the 3rd or 4th time of throwing up, my throat became swelled, the pain in my belly and chest intensified, and I had chills in addition to a high temperature. When that time came, everything ached. I was shivering and tried to get my spouse to wake up so he could help me. He disregarded it and reasoned that I must have gotten food sickness or had one drink too many the night before at dinner. He was probably right. He was of no assistance, and I was left to fend for myself. I couldn't stop throwing up, and the intensity of the pain was rising rapidly. I was in a lot of discomfort, but I couldn't take anything to alleviate it since everything I took would simply make the problem worse. Every minute seemed like hours. I was in so much discomfort that I simply couldn't take it any longer. At some point between 6 and 7, my hubby finally awoke. I don't remember how many times I vomited up, but after that I started dry heaving. Despite my best efforts, I was unable to move. I had a strong suspicion that something was amiss. My spouse grudgingly inquired as to whether or not I required transportation to the medical facility. I responded to him with a yes. My daughter and I exchanged hugs and kisses before I left her for the last time. I assured her that everything would be okay. He brought my kid to the room where my parents-in-law were occupying at the hotel. I broke down everything that was taking place. I really didn't want to waste a day at Disney, but I was to the point where I couldn't even stand up to change my clothing. My spouse did some research online and discovered that the closest hospital is 45 minutes away. When he informed me how long the journey would take, I told him that it was an unacceptable distance. I was concerned about my ability to complete the drive. Then he inquired as to whether or not I required an ambulance. I responded to him with a yes. As a result, he placed a call to the front desk, and after around 20 minutes, an ambulance arrived at the hotel to take me away. By that time, it was 8:30 in the morning, and I was in a great deal of discomfort. Even trying to take a nap on the uncomfortable bed in the ambulance caused my body pain. I felt pain in every single bone in my body. After examining me, they determined that I had symptoms similar to the flu and that I was dehydrated. They made an attempt to start an intravenous line of fluids. Because I was so severely dehydrated, it took 3 attempts before an IV could be started. After bringing me under control, they sent me to the closest hospital for further care. It was a Disney hospital, and it was located in quite close proximity. At first, it did not appear like I would be accepted into the program. They wouldn't let me drink anything, despite the fact that my mouth was parched, in the hopes that I wouldn't throw up again. It seemed like an eternity passed with each passing minute, and my condition continued to deteriorate. They eventually gave me permission to have a little cup of cold water. They took x-rays of my abdomen and chest and also conducted a CT scan on me. The first time they performed it was at around 10:15 in the morning, and I was so exhausted that I could hardly lie down. They were concerned that I had pneumonia and made the decision to admit me to the hospital. Around 2 in the afternoon, they made another attempt at the test. I was wailing in agony as I screamed. I informed them that I would lay down for the CT as soon as they had finished whatever it was that they were doing, but that I would not be able to stay in that position for any longer than that. My lungs were failing, and I was in a state of septic shock when the findings of the CT scans came back. So the doctor came in and informed my husband how bad I was and that we needed to start having conversations about whether or not I should be kept on life support. The news took my husband by surprise, and it made him feel terrible, but it made me feel relieved. I was in such much anguish that I wanted to end my life. It seemed reasonable to put myself on life support if that was going to be necessary. I was sent straight away to the intensive care unit. When I arrived, I was having trouble breathing and was in a lot of pain. On oxygen at a flow rate of 15 liters per minute, my pulse oximetry was in the low 80 seconds. In the beginning, I was put on a high-flow oxygen system with FiO2 at 100% solely so that they could boost my saturation to 88%. My breathing was shallow and labored, and my heart rate was elevated to more than 50. After that, an intubation and a mechanical ventilation were performed on me. Just before they intubated me, my husband was at my side, and I remember him urging me to come back to him and that he loves me. After that, they intubated me. After having an intubation performed, I was no longer in any agony. It was almost as if I were there in person, observing everything that was taking place in the hospital. In the later part of that day, they performed a bronchial lavage and removed a mucus block that was enormous and had small tentacles as a result of its location in my airways. Due to its enormous size, the physician's assistant decided to save it in order to demonstrate its significance to future doctors. She subsequently revealed to me that she had never witnessed one that was so enormous. She was the same physician's assistant that checked me into the hospital when I was first hospitalized. They took the examination once more on Friday of the same week. Despite the fact that I was still intubated, I recall them doing it twice. When they were taking the test again, there were quite a few other individuals in the room with them. The second time, they extracted liquids from a number of vials about the size of shot glasses. I remember my husband being by my side when I was being intubated, clutching my hands with both of his hands, and practically burying his head in them, while tears filled his eyes, and he told me to come back and how much he loved me. During that time, I was unconscious. It seemed as though no time was passing at all, but rather that everything was taking place all at once. I can still vividly recall seeing my mother, who had died away 7 years before, and her informing me that it wasn't yet my time. It appeared as though we went back and forth for a little while. I felt so fantastic. I had an incredible feeling of love and pleasure, and the ache in my body had completely disappeared. She yelled at me, "Ed and Callie still need you, so get your behind end out of bed." When I arrived at the hospital on Monday and was given a breathing tube on that same day, they attempted to discharge me the following Friday. After I woke up, I had very little recollection of that day. They wouldn't allow me get out of bed, despite the fact that my mother had instructed me to do so. I think I tried. Despite everything, I wasn't going down without a fight. As I began to grow furious, Ed grew worried. After hearing the news, his close buddy got in his car and traveled the many hours it would take to get to where they were meeting because he wanted to be there for him. After Ed arrived at the hospital, he questioned a male nurse about the next steps he should take. While the nurse was attempting to sedate me, he yelled, "Run, Ed, run," to get my attention. Therefore, he departed, and the nurse administered many different sedatives to me in order to ultimately calm down. I went to bed, and when I woke up the next morning, I was having hallucinations. I was unable to make meaningful sentences. I saw strange objects on the walls, and everything I saw was psychedelic and bizarre. When I asked Ed why it seemed to be that way, we both eventually came to the realization that I was hallucinating. I had never been in that situation before, so I was unaware of how it felt to go through it. When I came to, I found that I had a lot of questions. It appears that Ed did not inform his parents that I was intubated until after they had already departed on Wednesday. They were aware that I was in the hospital, but he did not want his mother and father to be concerned for the remainder of the journey regarding me. We still had park permits on Monday and Tuesday, and we had planned activities for both days. The journey was therefore completed by Callie and my in-laws. He shared the information with them right before they departed. It seemed to my future mother-in-law that she was deserting her child in the midst of his darkest nightmare. However, she was aware that it was imperative for Callie to resume her studies. When I first woke up, Ed and I discussed the notes we had taken. I informed him that I recalled him instructing me to come back when the broncs were finished being prepared. I informed him that I had seen my mother and that she had instructed me to get my rear end out of bed. He reasoned that it must have been a dream or the intubation medications. He is under the impression that the drugs are what caused me to awaken. He explained to me that because my fever was so high, they were covering me with ice packs. He informed the nurses that they should count themselves fortunate that I wasn't awake. I am one of those people that gets chilly really easily, and I wouldn't want to be that way even in the summer. He informed me about this one guy nurse who took care of me for the majority of the time that I was there. He was there. It was clear that he was a native of one of the islands due to the fact that he spoke with an accent. Ed eventually remarked that after some time had passed, I exclusively replied to that nurse. On Friday, the nurse would not be there since he was departing for his weekend vacation. Therefore, he cautioned Ed not to assume that I will be able to talk or walk when I get up, as it is possible that I will not. He was briefing Ed on what was ahead for me, and Ed was paying attention. Everyone who had helped me throughout my illness came to my bedside to express their astonishment at the speed of my recovery. After being intubated for one day, I was able to walk and talk on the following day. I was feeble and even a touch fragile at times, but it seemed like I was getting well quite rapidly. They informed me that they were surprised by how rapidly I was able to recuperate. They were all fantastic, and I am so appreciative that they were there for me. I was kept in intensive care until Monday, when my condition had improved to the point that I could be moved to a regular room. After having an intubation performed, I was unable to fall or maintain sleep. After being relocated to a standard room, I inquired about receiving some Benadryl. In the evening, the male nurse working in the intensive care unit paid me a visit. He gave me a hug before telling me how anxious I made him and that he couldn't believe I was released from the intensive care unit so fast. It was imperative that him witness it for himself. I decided to remain for one more night, and by Tuesday morning, I was packed and ready to go. They had some trouble getting a reading from the pulse ox machine, but in the end they were successful. I had reached a point where I could be discharged from the hospital. The physician recommended that I spend one more night in the vicinity, just in case something untoward occurred. As a result, my husband brought me to Disney World, where we stayed at one of the less costly hotels and were able to return to downtown Disney for more dining and shopping opportunities. The next day, we made our way back home. Since then, I have visited a large number of physicians and experts in an effort to piece together all of the facts on my health. It did not appear to be a coincidence that I was experiencing so many health problems, and then this on top of that. At the Cleveland Clinic, I've seen a number of experts, including a neurologist, for various conditions. A condition known as postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome and autonomic autoimmune dysfunction has been identified as mine. There is a position for it on the Lambert-Eaton scale. They have not arrived at a conclusive diagnosis as of yet.